Some of these objects are not capable of being moved because they're too bloody big.
Oggi vi portiamo un medley di interviste e interventi di Ross Coulthart, un giornalista investigativo australiano pluripremiato, con oltre 3 decenni di esperienza in giornali e televisione, tra cui servizi per il quotidiano The Sydney Morning Herald, per la ABC TV Four Corners, per il programma domenicale di Nine Networks e per 60 Minutes, per il Sunday Night di Seven Network. 5 volte vincitore del premio giornalistico nazionale australiano, il Walkley Award, compreso il massimo riconoscimento, il Walkley Gold. Vincitore di un Oggi, il premio più importante della TV australiana, per il miglior reportage televisivo sugli affari pubblici. E vincitore di una medaglia d'oro del New York Film Festival per il giornalismo investigativo internazionale, nonché autore di 5 libri bestseller. Ross Coulthart, il 26 luglio 2023, ha intervistato David Grush, negli Stati Uniti. Infatti, anche se australiano, è uno dei protagonisti della Disclosure insieme a George Knapp e Leslie Keane. Noi di proposito non abbiamo messo i giornalisti tra i protagonisti della Disclosure, principalmente perché abbiamo preferito mettere i tecnici, ma anche perché alcuni anni fa, quando abbiamo iniziato a seguire la Disclosure, non era così chiaro come oggi quanto fosse rilevante il loro ruolo. Ross Coulthart è un serio professionista, ma soprattutto quello che ha detto in questi anni si è rivelato essere vero e in anticipo di circa 6 mesi, evidentemente delle fonti molto attendibili. Oggi facciamo un viaggio nelle sue interviste cercando di scovare le sue dichiarazioni più interessanti, i suoi punti di vista e portarci avanti nella disclosure.
I recently engaged with sources who are former Australian Special Forces military who tell me that they've participated in what essentially is a kind of UAP material retrieval program. They were commissioned by a private aerospace company to go around the world and investigate and collect data and material pertaining to UAP sightings. And it's really interesting because there's an incident that I'm aware of in the Australian outback involving the crash of some kind of an object, and I've now interviewed farmers who've told me that they saw left-hand drive American vehicles driving through the Australian outback with people wearing American military uniforms. Something that doesn't often happen in the Australian outback, but basically...
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Not a lot I can tell you. I'm still investigating it, but basically it does appear to me that there are military units that are operated out of a private aerospace company in Long Beach, California, that are involved in attempted UAP object or space object retrieval. And there was indeed, during the Cold War, there was a secret operation called Moondust that was Project Moondust, which did actually target Russian, Chinese, intercontinental ballistic missile nose cones and anything else that landed, so that we could spy on the kind of technology that they were developing and get ahead of them on the latest missile designs and rocket designs. There are now documents that have been declassified that shows that Moondust was also involved in UFO retrieval. And one of the things that shocked me when I was doing my research, the skeptical journo like myself who walked into this thinking I'm very soon going to be able to demonstrate that this is secret military technology. There's an incredible document from the CIA's office in Pakistan, which has been declassified, which records the discovery of a flying saucer. That's how it's described, with a full description of this elliptical disc metallic-shaped object that's been recovered whole from the ground in either part of Pakistan or Afghanistan. There are multiple cases like this, and there's another one in Africa. But these are all referred to as part of Project Moondust, Operation Moondust. And they all get taken back to what sounds like a veritable car park of UFOs at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base's Foreign Technology Division. Contrary to what the public's been told, active UAP retrieval programs going on for decades, going way back to the 1940s and the 1950s. And despite what the public's been told, The US military never stopped investigating UFOs after Project Blue Book. What Project Blue Book was a deliberate disinformation program. J. Allen Hynek, the scientist who was appointed to be the scientific investigator for Project Blue Book, later on admitted that his brief was to essentially dissemble and to find a prosaic explanation that might remotely fit the sighting that they'd seen. He said it wasn't a genuinely scientific investigation and that the real cases were handled by some other arm of the military. And what I've been told by my sources in the Pentagon and different intelligence services, beyond any shadow of a doubt, is that there has been an ongoing investigation into the phenomenon, as it's now called, because UAP, UFO, I think too specifically indicates a solid craft, a simple thing, a simple explanation like a spacecraft. More and more, it's being put to me by people that this psychotronic explanation is the one that we need to be focusing on. Jacques Vallée has notoriously said that he thinks that the extraterrestrial hypothesis to explain the phenomenon is far too simplistic, and that you cannot view it in isolation, that a lot of what the world has long dismissed as mystical, spiritual, fairy tale phenomena, paranormal phenomena, may in fact be part of the same thing. And I think this is possibly why there's a huge reluctance to engage with it, because a couple of the people that I've spoken to have told me that they find the phenomenon genuinely scary. It's not always benign. And, there are instances where there's been a genuine apprehension that it's a very real threat to safety. 80,000 feet, or possibly above 80,000 feet in orbit, because the ceiling of their radar system was 80,000 feet. It went from 80,000 feet to just above the surface of the ocean in 0.78 of a second. Now that speed is hundreds of thousands of kilometers an hour. And for the move in 0.78 of a second to occur like that, the G-forces were in excess of 12,000 G-forces. Any terrestrial technology, any terrestrial craft would have fallen apart after about 16 G. That's the most a modern airframe can handle. Any human being basically faints after 9 or 10 G, even if they're wearing a G suit. The idea of not only hundreds but thousands of G forces being applied on a craft or a human being is impossible. The only logical conclusion from the scientists that I've spoken to is that whatever this technology is, it's got the capacity to manipulate space-time. Yeah, the best explanation that I've been able to get from people who are talking to a non-technologist and non-scientist like me is that theoretically it's possible. The Alcubierre drive was postulated about 20 years ago. It's possible to warp space-time.
Yeah, definitely.
And that you can create a bubble of space-time in front of a craft that allows it to displace space instantaneously.
We just don't have the energy sources to be able to do that.
And that's the issue, is that it's been speculated that the energy that would be required to create such displacement would require more than the power of our sun. As one person said to me, something's doing this. And privately, people are telling me that the only plausible explanation is that this is a complete quantum leap in technology. It represents the capacity for something, some kind of intelligent life form to essentially displace space-time. Now, I can hear the debunkers scoffing, and I don't blame them. I am too. I'm still skeptical. The perception that this is a new phenomenon isn't correct at all. There has actually been anomalous phenomenon detected all throughout recorded human history. I've had the privilege of talking to venerable Aboriginal elders who record the Dreamtime stories that go back, in some cases, 30, 40,000 years, that record the Wandjina people, beings, sky beings, coming down from the sky and engaging with the ancient Aboriginal people in Australia. And there are similar mythologies all around the world, in South America, Native American, even European civilizations. One of the most fascinating things for me was to go to places like the Kimberleys in the northwest of Australia and to look at some of the eerie cave paintings on the walls there that go back thousands of years. And they show extraordinary beings, like craft entities, humanoid entities with big heads. I don't know what they are, but the Aboriginal people that I spoke to laughed when I asked them about it. And they talked about the min lights. They talked about the spirit beings that they've seen for years, orbs of light that engage with people that they believe are the spirits of their ancestors. I don't know what it is. All I know is there's a mystery, and I think it's jolly well worth investigating.
Ross, can you tell us a bit about these sky people? So what did they do to the Aboriginals, or how did they interact with the Aboriginals in the stories?
The Wandjina people is one of the strongest Dreamtime myths, and I wouldn't want to misrepresent the story without going into too much detail. But I had the pleasure once of meeting an Aboriginal fellow called Blue Bob, who was working with one of the mining companies to help isolate sacred sites for that mining company so that they knew where not to dig. And he had this almost mystical ability to navigate across the landscape without GPS by essentially using his mind. And they told me that they were just awestruck by the fact that this guy knew things about the landscape, and he did it with his oral history. He could actually use the dreaming stories to navigate, that they were a scientific record, not just of stories, but also of the landscape. And that's the way they viewed the Wandjina stories. The Wandjina stories were essentially stories of beings that came down and visited the Aboriginal people 30, 40,000 years ago. There are similar stories, by the way, that go right back to Assyrian civilization.
Is that fair to say?
I don't want to unnecessarily alarm people, but no, there are aspects of the phenomenon that I find quite alarming and scary that I've been told about. I don't want to speak publicly about them because I haven't been able to confirm them.
Sure.
But it involves bad things being done to human beings.
Yeah.
And frankly, if they're true, they're deeply alarming and concerning. One thing I would draw your attention to is one of the things that Mr. Grush was able to speak about on a limited basis in the DOPSA agreement that the Defence Department authorised him to speak about was agreements. And when I put to him that this involved implicitly agreements with non-human intelligence, he didn't disagree with me.
Yeah.
And that's where I would be looking. And it was largely being ignored by much of the legacy media. And then all of a sudden, it started bobbing up in Congress. And that's where we're at now. The big question is Congress going to do its job?
Yeah.
I'm not yet 100% convinced that they are, but let's just wait and see. We're at a really important tipping point in history. Imagine if what Mr. Grush is saying is true. Just for a moment, entertain the possibility that what he's saying is true. If what he's saying is true, we are at a tipping point, a paradigm change in world history.
Right.
Firstly, it means we're not alone. And secondly, it means that there are technologies that your government has access to, which it's been improperly, illegally withholding from the knowledge of the Congress.
Becoming aware of the US Air Force concealing things still, and that this Navy commander took this to the White House. I just wondered if you were able to expand on this at all.
I can't say much about it, to be honest. I'm aware of it. I know it's true. And I know that it's part of a broader battle that's been going on between the Pentagon and the White House. What I can point to is the fact that it was the White House, which is obviously the executive, the political arm representing Joe Biden, that made the political decision to appoint an interagency task force over the head of the Pentagon, who wanted everything to go through AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. What has to be asked is, why did that happen? Now, what was it that made the White House start to lose confidence? And frankly, that's the only interpretation you can make from this. I was told that, yes, there is a senior, very senior Navy commander who's come forward and approached the Biden White House directly with information that suggests that the Pentagon has not been entirely open about what it knows on the subject of UAPs. That's all I can say for now.
Could I just ask, would that include legacy programs?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And it's done against the wishes of the US Air Force, which has been doing in previous months its level best to push back against congressional push for transparency. And I can tell you, it's not going to work. And so those people in the US Air Force in particular, and the CIA, who are trying to hose this whole issue down, they're after you. And so you've got a choice. Those officials now have a choice. They can either decide to come forward and admit what they know, or they can be excoriated in the court of public opinion for essentially lawless, criminal, possibly treasonous behavior. I'm serious. This is really serious. What I find amazing about this is that, again, the US media is asleep at the wheel on one of the most significant stories of our time.
Right.
I mean, it's massive. It has international implications. I've had conversations with US military officials who talk candidly to me, and I don't know if it's true or not, about a non-human intelligence on this planet. I don't know if that's true. I've talked with people about crash retrievals, about American government secret reverse engineering programs. I don't know if that's true, but people are saying it is. Don't you think it's time to stop the nonsense and start investigating? You know what I'm more fascinated by? The implications for where we came from. You know, and Lou Elizondo, I think one of the most interesting articles that's ever been written about Lou was a British GQ interview with him that ran.
That's fantastic, that. Brilliant.
I think it was late last year.
Yeah.
And, you know, he started talking about human genetics. And it's funny, I've got a paper somewhere here, which is called the Wow paper. And it's written by I think a mathematician somewhere in Eastern Europe. And he talks about the unlikelihood, based on statistical analysis, that the human genome evolved the way it did randomly. And essentially, he's done a statistical analysis of the human genome, and he sees far too many patterns in it to reach the conclusion that this could have occurred by simple evolutionary processes of natural selection. And it's a really fascinating paper. And frankly, it makes my head explode after about the first page. But I've put it by friends of mine who are equipped mentally and with their training to be able to read such papers. And they say the mathematics is sound, that it holds. And to me, it's more fascinating to me the implications of not just the potential that we're talking about an advanced intelligence with advanced technology that may be operating on this planet. It could be that we're talking here about an intelligence that molded the development of humanity as primitive apes. I remember years ago when I was on the Sydney Morning Herald as a cub reporter, I met a molecular biologist, and we literally spent an afternoon talking, and I loved his brain. And I wrote a piece that I've still got a copy of it somewhere. But in the course of his descriptions of evolutionary biology and his account of the work that he was doing, he used the words cosmic shove. And he said that he couldn't explain the pace of the development of humans from primitive apes through to an advanced Homo sapiens with a forebrain that was capable of what our brains are capable of. He couldn't describe that with the levels of random mutation that you get with natural selection. And he said that the only way he could explain it was with a cosmic shove. And that's stuck in my brain all through my career. And so when you have people like Lou Elizondo, as he did, I think, in that GQ paper, talking about the possibility that whatever this is might have meddled with the human genome tens of thousands, millions of years ago, that's when it starts getting interesting for me. It really does raise quite fundamental questions of who we are, us human beings. Could we, the whole idea of God, maybe one of the reasons why the religious fundamentalists find, if they know the story, if they know the real story, find it so confronting, is because their idea of God is confounded by the simple realization that God is essentially an alien intelligence that hybridized us humans from apes. Could it be as simple as that? Could we be some elaborate science experiment? I don't think that's too confronting an idea. I mean, frankly, I'm grateful I'm no longer an ape. But, I think the interesting thing is that if there is an alien intelligence engaging with this planet, and seemingly benevolently in most cases, if it is, and this is the thought process that's going through my mind, if it does turn out to be true, as people like Elizondo and Gary Nolan and many others are suggesting, that there is some kind of intelligence operating on this planet that is non-human, why is it here? That's the bigger question. What's it doing here? And when you ask that question, that's why I felt that it was important to at least give voice to those experiences who talk about the abduction phenomenon, the cattle mutilation phenomenon, people who talk about and make extraordinary claims about being experimented upon by non-human intelligences. I'm not saying that's real, but if the implications are that we have a non-human intelligence on this planet, why would they be taking an interest in our genetics? Well, what's going on there? And why aren't we asking these questions? Frankly, I think that's the bigger issue. That yes, I take it as a given, frankly, that there is a non-human intelligence operating on this planet. I take it as a given that the United States knows a hell of a lot more than it's letting on. It's been sitting on it. And I don't quite know why it's been sitting on it. That's the thing that I find the hardest thing of all, is understanding why they've kept it so secret. But to me, the bigger question that I think we'll soon be addressing is, what are the implications for the origins of humanity that lie behind this discovery? My source, who said to me, frankly, that, it's quite clear that there is an explanation for human civilization that is offered by this NHI presence. And the explanation is that they've been here all along, and that there are civilizations that have flourished and diminished that we don't know about yet, that can explain these kind of technologies that exist in our prehistory. It fascinates me because Egypt, probably more than any other place in the world, is the location for that. And the suggestion was put to me, to answer the long-winded way I've answered your question, the suggestion was put to me by the person that I was speaking to, who'd heard me speaking. Well, of course, of course, there's technologies there. I mean, do you think that this was all, really known civilizations? And the suggestion was that there were civilizations before this one. And I find it intensely frustrating, because one of the things that I find annoying is there are some popular analyses suggesting that there is, some kind of catastrophe that was visited on the Earth. I think it's 12,500 years ago.
The Younger Dryas cataclysm.
The Younger Dryas. And quite a number of people that I've spoken to in the intelligence community have drawn my attention to the fact that the CIA in the 1960s spent an inordinate amount of money investigating exactly that. And if you go to the CIA library, America's External Intelligence Service, you can actually read some of those documents.
Yeah.
Why was America's supposedly premier intelligence service investigating ancient civilizations? And why did it sponsor investigations into the pyramids and things like that in the 1960s and the 1970s? And a lot of this is public record. And I find it fascinating. And the journo in me doesn't know the answers necessarily, But what I'm interested in is trying to get to the bottom of, why are these mysteries not being answered? Why can't we find out more? There's a whole cadre of supposed experts on social media who are saying it can't be, therefore it isn't. And that's been the default for so many years. It can't be, therefore it isn't. Imagine if what Mr. Grush is saying is true. Think about the implications of that. And imagine if, as I've just intimated to you, some of these objects are not capable of being moved because they're too bloody big.
Before you leave, is there anything else you can tell us about this gigantic vehicle that's too big to move? What were you told specifically? Come on, just give me some more details.
I've told you
on this.
all. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to get in trouble
damn
for
you, Ross.
saying what I said. I'm
Damn
going
you.
to get in trouble.
No,
let me just tell you this. I know exactly where it is.
Do you think that's going to come to light?
One day.
One day.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because it's absolutely gobsmacking that it's being kept as a secret. Imagine having an object that's so big, it's just not conceivable to move it. The continued security and control of such an object for many decades. Who's paid for that? What programs have paid for that? Has that been disclosed to taxpayers? This is going to be a really fun inquiry if Congress starts doing its job. There are proven effects from UAPs on humans that are currently being investigated by the CIA, a funded research study where they're looking at pilots, experiences, witnesses who've been exposed to what they suspect is some form of radiation from these objects. And some of them are suffering health effects, but there are others who are also claiming to have had things happen to their brains after they were exposed to the phenomenon that have given them, psi abilities, the ability to have precognition or understanding of things that they previously couldn't understand, understanding of advanced physics. That they know that the human race is aware of a non-human intelligence. And I think that the world will probably know publicly within, I suspect, 12 to 18 months.